Hi, and welcome to Black History Quest, Oregon Black Pioneers History Research and Conversation Program, sponsored by the Collins Foundation. Now, my name is Mariah Rocker, and I will be your host for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us to learn more about Oregon's Black history. We are coming to you live on the Oregon Black Pioneers Facebook and YouTube pages. If you can't stick around for the whole show, don't worry. You'll be able to find this and every episode of Black History Quest on the Oregon Black Pioneers YouTube page, along with other great resources. But before we get started with the show, what is Oregon Black Pioneers? We're Oregon's only nonprofit dedicated to preserving and presenting the experiences of people of African descent statewide. We illuminate this seldom told history through a variety of ways, including books, free lesson plans available to download on our website, traveling exhibits on display across the state, walking tours, presentations, and programs like this one. Check out our website, OregonBlackPioneers.org, to learn more about us and Oregon's Black history. Now back to the show. This is our 12th episode of Black History Quest. Black History Quest, if you're not sure what it is an Oregon Black Pioneers original program with the goal of uncovering more about Oregon's Black history. Thanks to the support of the Collins Foundation, we get to hire local researchers to act as our history investigators and dive deeper into a source that piqued their interest. Every other month, we meet here with our fellow Oregon Black pioneers like you to learn more about what they've discovered and take a peek behind the curtain of historical research. Each presentation is archived on our YouTube channel for those who can't join us on the live show. But for those of you who are watching live, you have the chance to engage with our fantastic researchers. So make sure to leave your questions in the chat section of the live stream so that we can discuss them on air after the presentation. Now that we're all on the same page, let's get this show on the road. Tonight, we are very lucky to have Kellen Akiyama as our history investigator. Kellen Akiyama is a high school humanities teacher for the Grants Pass School District, who was named Oregon Regional Teacher of the Year 2025. In 2021, Kellen persuaded his school board to adopt a new class that would count as a U.S. history credit, African American Studies. This is not the first time. Kellen has taught African American studies to over hundreds of youth, high school youth across Oregon, from Portland to Grants Pass for over 20 years. He also currently teaches film as literature, a social emotional learning class, and a plethora of language arts courses at a small alternative school in Southern Oregon. Kellen is deeply committed on many levels to seeing students internalize a socially conscious, multi-layered, and culturally rich curriculum on the daily. He is a member of the African American Black Student Success Committee for the Oregon Department of Education and a chairperson of the Committee for Racial Equity at the Oregon Education Association. His favorite thing to do is oversee the very first Black Student Union in Grants Pass and foster a sense of social justice in these Black students. Kellen tries to locate Black history wherever he goes. And as Kellen has expressed, we are at a very critical moment, a moment when knowing our history will absolutely save us. I could not agree more. I'd love to give a warm welcome to Kellen Akiyama. Hi, Kellen.
Hi, everyone. That was a really wonderful and touching, flattering introduction, Mariah. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, of course. Thank you so much for the work that you've been doing within the community and for joining us tonight as our history investigator.
Well,
We
thank you.
are honestly so thrilled to have you.
Good. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yay. All right. So, Kellen, as you know, we like to start all of our Black History Quest investigations with a single source that sparked an interest. So, can you start by telling us what source you were looking at and why it caught your attention?
Yeah, I was actually doing some research on the KKK in Oregon in the early 1900s and how they came to Oregon. In specifically Southern Oregon, because I wanted my students to kind of get, I guess, be feel really like that they could touch some of the history
Mm.
in their own town. Because the Civil War is seems like a very far away place, because the East Coast and the South seemed like everything's over there. This was something that I really wanted to connect with them, or and because My students see a lot of daily stuff and they hear a lot of stories about the KKK. So I thought I would start there. But what I did is I came across an article by Guy Maynard that described the Black soldiers who came to Camp White, which is a makeshift camp in north of Medford in 1941. Um, and in the article itself was just really magnetic, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but that's my inspiration. And that's what started me looking at what these Black soldiers did in our community back in 1942.
I love that. That's so interesting. Honestly, I'm glad that your research pivoted to focus more on the Black soldiers, and but it is also important to make sure that folks know that there was a very big Klan presence here in Oregon, and to connect to those like national stories that we don't often connect to Oregon, even though they were absolutely playing out here as well. So I
Absolutely.
appreciate that you're doing that for your students and doing that for us. I love that. I want to ask, what sorts of questions did you have about this source, and what did you think it might represent as you started to dive into it?
Well, once I started diving into it, really it was kind of that, I guess, defiance that we all have when somebody says that you can't do something, then you automatically, like, your brain actually goes to trying to find all the ways that you can do something that somebody told you not to do. So, in that vein, I was really struck by his the absence of personal stories of these Black
Mm,
soldiers in this area during that time. Um, so I think that really just kind of like turned something on in me. I'm like, I am going to be dedicated, and I'm just going to try to find a story of Black soldiers here in Oregon. And
mm.
and I'm really glad I did. It was just really fun.
Awesome. Well, great. Now that we're all super intrigued to learn more, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you to share your findings.
Oh, thanks, Mariah. Appreciate you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to start my slideshow here. This is my first slide. I'm going to back up a little bit and just say thank you to Mariah Rocker. I want to thank Belinda Miller and Zachary Stocks and all the benevolent donors of Oregon Black Pioneers. Thank you for your support and kindness. Everyone has been so great to work with. And again, I am so beyond honored to be here. My name, again, is Kellen Akiyama. I teach African American Studies at a small high school in Southern Oregon named Gladiola High, which is part of the Grants Pass School District. And forgive me for turning on my teacher mode today, but I oftentimes have to turn this mode on daily. And it's kind of a way of behaving. I promise I won't do it in a cocktail party, but sometimes I do, and it's just a problem, right? But anyway, part of being a teacher is asking myself questions, and so for as far as history goes and teaching history, I always ask myself, how do we relate to history in the present? Meaning, how do we approach something like the enslavement period in America from the lens of being alive in 2025? Um, I also ask, like, what do we take away from history that enriches our lives right now and we can use right now? Something like giving us tools to make our lives better, like tomorrow, and to make our lives better in the future, our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives too. Okay, before I begin, I'm going to deliver my warnings. This presentation will allude to some very real, some very historical racial violence going on in America around the period of World War II, 1941 to 1946. I will also use some of the historical labels of Negro and colored, Both of these labels are used to describe an extremely large group of people. I try to use these terms mostly paraphrasing the history, and I promise to get all my historical context correct. But yes, history will often label large groups of individuals into one category and move them around like chess pieces. And that's what we do in history. We try to say, well, these people did this and these people did that, but really, the reality is not that simple. The reality is that um, whatever label in history you use, every individual has a prerogative, and some of those individuals have less prerogative than others, and some of those individuals have not always have a voice, which is very true of these African American soldiers who lived and trained at Camp White, Oregon during the years of World War II. Okay. I want to start out. So, if I was teaching a lesson on the Black soldiers who lived in Camp White during the years of World War II, I would definitely make sure that my students understand vocabulary, um, and definitely the word de facto. I love the word de facto. I think it sounds cool. Um, and I really didn't learn this word until I was in college. But as an adverb, if you can see on the screen, I highlighted it's synonymous with actually. And as an adjective, it can mean not formally recognized in an economic, it is the economic or social factors instead of the laws. So when I first learned this word de facto in college, it was from one of my favorite classes, Ethnic Communities 101. And I want to thank Professor William Toll, who defined it for me as a Latin word for in fact, because de facto is the reality of what happened. Laws can change, presidents can be elected, but sometimes the reality is more powerful than that recorded law. So keep that concept in your pocket, everybody, before we uncover this history. And maybe as we go along, reflect on what de facto means in our own world. It's realities of how we live. It's the cultural practices. It's the behaviors, and a lot of that sometimes we'll go into a feature article, but not always be recorded in a census, not always be recorded in laws. Okay. And by the way, this is not me front loading excuses of why my research didn't go as planned. But I think the lack of individual stories from these Black soldiers alludes to very cultural and historical reasons. And I'll just say one of those reasons being wartime history. During wartime, a lot of times what we do and what we say and how we behave is different than when we were in peacetime, than when society is in peacetime. Like I was telling Mariah, my inspiration is this article from Oregon Humanities titled Just People Like Us by Guy Maynard. The byline says in 1940 Southern Oregon, prisoners of war were more welcome than U.S. military of color. And that's from Maynard. And I really feel like the whole article kind of comes with a nod and a wink from Guy Maynard. He's a great writer. But I came across this article, like I told Mariah, as I was looking to teach a more local history of how the KKK came to Southern Oregon. But even though I didn't use this particular article, I was really magnetically drawn to its findings, or really the lack of findings regarding Black soldiers living in Southern Oregon at the time. And I kind of described that to you a few minutes ago. But I encourage everybody to read it. You could just search Just People Like Us and Guy Maynard and Oregon Humanities. I'm really thankful that it is published. Mr. Maynard in the article poses not just historical research, but also philosophical questions on what we value as Oregonians. And this is his underlying question about our lives in Oregon. Why are the efforts, production, and photos of German prisoners of war who were imprisoned in Camp White um, so much more prominent in our history, in our Southern Oregon history, than those efforts of these African American soldiers who, in my own research, have far outnumbered the prisoners of war? Um, Maynard did a great job to put much of the evidence just right smack in front of our eyes. So again, like if you can read this article, it's super interesting. Guy Maynard to me is really the trailblazer in this arena. And I'm going to read a little bit of his opening. On February 2nd, 1911, the Medford Mail Tribune reported that all but 173 of Jackson County's 25,000 people were white, listing the others as 56 Negroes, 5 Indians, 84 Chinese, and 28 Japanese, noting that this demography reflected that of the state of the whole. The story concluded, hence Oregon leads the state and is politically as well as racially a white man's country, in quotes. So he was quoting that. That regional racial identity was reinforced in the years leading up to World War II. The Ku Klux Klan was very active in Josephine County. Was very active in Jackson County, and Medford, Ashland, and Grants Pass were widely known as sundown towns. And sundown towns designate communities where unofficial policies and even signs on telephone poles made it clear that non-whites, especially African Americans, should be out of town before sunset or face dire consequences. Mentions of African Americans, often called coloreds in the Medford newspapers in the 1920s and 30s, usually referenced entertainers, shoe shiners, chauffeurs, porters, poker sharks, and dice players, people that were normally on the margins of the community. And that is his opening. So he really does set a stage for us and a time period where African Americans were pigeonholed in a lot of ways into certain roles. African Americans were put into certain stereotypical situations or characteristics that we all know and could constitute a whole another lesson. Okay, so what I wrote on my slide here is that out of this article, what we know is that yes, that Black soldiers did live and work at Camp White, but a total number is not known. At the time, 208 is what Guy Maynard quoted from the Mail Tribune in 1942. Another thing we know from this article is Black soldiers were entertained at homes of benevolent, wealthy families and businesses and other patrons in Medford. So I've said the third bullet too, and I'm just going to move on. This is really what prompted me to do my research is this little phrase here. I'll read the first part of it. There has no record of how many Black soldiers served at Camp White, and not one testimonial from any Black soldiers about their experiences camp. In a footnote in his history of the camp, George Kramer, who wrote the book Camp White, City in the Agate Desert, notes that in about half of the interviews he conducted, former soldiers stationed at the camp were surprised to hear that any Black soldiers had served at Camp White. In all the interviews he did, no one remembered even one African American soldier's name. It was like they were never there. So that's really kind of like, what inspired me to get. I need to dig a little bit more because I know that's not true. And I was glad I did because it's not true. there were many Black soldiers who came to Camp White. Okay, I'm going to set several stages for you, and I really have to do this because um, uh, I'm going to quickly go through this. I know that I have a lot of adults in the room, and a lot of adults know about 1941, what happened in Pearl Harbor, World War II, etc. But I'm just going to set a couple of stages here. The first stage I'm going to set is World War II African American soldiers that have enlisted in the army in World War II. The years of World War II and post World War II were years of sacrifice for many Americans, but also years of fear for a lot of us. And I will come back to that. I have taught almost every aspect of World War II to my students. I've taught Japanese internment, Pearl Harbor's deafening blow, Bataan Death March, battles in Germany, France, and an occasional description of how Hitler failed in Russia. But after studying this topic on Black soldiers at Camp White, really, honestly, I will never teach this war the same way again. There's obviously a much deeper, 1.2 million African American soldiers served during World War II. And it goes without saying that these African American soldiers helped in America's success. When you begin to study the movement, training, and dispatches of World War II African American soldiers, you begin to see that impact of lots of racist ideologies, whatever the hierarchies of the United States military or the sundown towns of the US. I've taught African American studies for a long time to high school age students, and I'm embarrassed to say that sometimes I got lazy myself, and I would say these two things to my classes about African American soldiers in World War II. Number one, World War II gave African American soldiers new confidence, a new outlook on the world, as only putting on a soldier's uniform will do. Yay. New confidence. That's always good. Two, African American soldiers come home. When they came home after being overseas, they came home to a country that was still very segregated, separated, and we're still in the middle of a Jim Crow period. So just keep that in mind. 1942, we are still in the middle of what I call a Jim Crow period that is almost lasts for 100 years in this country. So it's really, I talk about it more like an apartheid state. But just also remember that the Jim Crow laws in our country were not federal laws. They just came from a federal Supreme Court ruling. And it goes all the way back to Plessy versus Ferguson. But really, it was up to the local leaders and the local laws that actually put these Jim Crow laws in place, especially in the South. Okay. So I have those two things that I said to students. So when we listen to these two overarching statements with a critical ear, history is very complex. And it's never really clear as these two statements, these two bullet points. Because these two bullet points merely just scratch the surface of an incredible reality, a de facto reality, and a greater truth about American history. There's a much obviously deeper story, as would Matthew Delmont's book, Half American, would describe to you. I'm going to hold this book up, you guys. It is a great book. I'm going to read a little bit of the introduction to you, on page XXI. In quote from Mr. Delmont, it is high time that we reckon honestly with the history of World War II and the historical relationship between Nazism and white supremacy in the country. While many white Americans would hold idealized notions of World War II as a good war fought by the greatest generation, an era when America was supposedly greater than it is today, the experiences of Black Americans tell a different story. During the summer of 1943, for example, race riots or rebellions raged across the country. There are more than 240 reports of organized racial violence in cities and at military bases, and most of these conflicts were sparked by police and deputized white citizens attacking Black citizens and soldiers. Then, as in now, this racial violence raised fundamental questions about Americans' commitment to democracy. Okay, it's a great book, and I really encourage you guys to read it. One of the conclusions I came with as I set this stage is African Americans experienced a plethora of discrimination, not to mention acts of violence against them when they returned home. Many World War II soldiers who returned home could not take advantage of post war booms like the GI Bill and buying a house. The Black enlisted in the Army and Black soldiers endured facilities that were not equal or adequate. They were cold, there were cold housings, sometimes tents as opposed to buildings, old uniforms, and inadequate food. Black soldiers and white soldiers had many confrontations, which ended in consequences that burdened African Americans disproportionately than it burdened their white counterparts who may or may have not gotten in trouble or had consequences. Okay, as I set the stage for Camp White, I'm going to try to be as quick as I can. Camp White is a U.S. Army cantonment, which is just a fancy word for makeshift Army base. And you can see in the picture, it spans a lot of this valley north of Medford. It was built on the Agate Desert near Medford, Oregon at the start of World War II. It first was the home of the 91st Fur Tree Division under Major Charles Gethard, the commanding general. Camp White trained the 96th Division as well. On the outside, Camp White looked very Army-like in its scope. It was a very large project. But really, the building of this makeshift city was a partnership between the community and the government in so many ways. A project like this has a likelihood really to change the demographics of a place forever, and it did. Many of the white soldiers married girls from Medford, and they came back to Medford and settled down here after the war was over. But that didn't happen for Black soldiers, unfortunately. You may not be able to imagine the politics, the legwork, the communication, the logistics, all needed to see this project come to task. At the time, this makeshift city tripled the size of Medford. So with this new training facility on the West Coast, this new cantonment had every intention to bring the economy of Medford out of the Great Depression, and it did just that. Really, we're talking 1941, and the war itself did bring a lot of America out of the Great Depression anyway. But this Camp White actually gave enough support economically to our area that it really did do its job economically and bring us out of the Great Depression. So this is my what I call the Southern Oregon slide, and I'm not going to go keep too long on this, but a little bit about Southern Oregon's history. If you've ever, in every account I've ever read of a person of color traveling to Southern Oregon, there's always some kind of warning. And it's kind of like a ghost story. Don't go there because Boo Radley lives there. And they warn of this, the intense prejudice. They warn a lot of times of the intense things like necktie parties from the Ku Klux Klan as just kind of warnings. But a part of that is really, to me, de facto and part of how sundown towns succeeded in Oregon. It was really just more like every person's responsibility in a lot of ways. So what we know historically about this area, in 1855, the Rogue River Wars rounded up indigenous people in this valley, and we created and what was created, was a type of trail of tears in Oregon that led indigenous people up the Rogue River to now what is Gold Beach. Okay, we know that. Also, Executive Order 9066 from Franklin Delano Roosevelt in February of 1942 incarcerated about 150,000 Japanese Americans all along the West Coast. Now, if you can think of that as like being what happened only months before these black soldiers arrived in Southern Oregon. You just have to put those two things together, because the 39 Japanese Americans that lived in Jackson County were all put on a bus in that early in that year. Also, we know that Chinese immigrants were forced out of town. The Jacksonville Sentinel described one incident as a cabin occupied by a company of Chinese miners was set afire and by a party of armed men, and there was also shooting at the cabin. There's also lots of rumors of lynchings and hangings of Chinese immigrants in Jacksonville that it's still kind of like get shared today. On the screen, you guys will see that the Ku Klux Klan in 1921, recruiter Luther Powell stepped off of Southern Pacific train in Medford from California, and he set up shop in Medford, and the whole state soon became home to the largest KKK organization west of the Mississippi. Now, that's a little bit of setting that stage. So when I started this research, one of the things that I saw connected with or a connection with was United Service Organizations. Now, if you know your MASH, and I'm dating myself a little bit, but if you know your MASH episodes, or if you have any associations with Bob Hope, the USO is an American nonprofit corporation that provides live entertainment to armed forces, whether it is at home here or abroad. Okay, and I still have this really nice video that will set the stage as well.
USO canteens became soldiers' homes away from home.
The military, in many ways, strips an individual of their identity and rebuilds them in a new way. You know, it is the obligation of the military to bring the men together and train them as a unit. But then they would go to a place like the USO and they were a person again, a person with an individual story.
But not every city welcomed every soldier.
You know, there was a Jim Crow aspect to the U.S. Armed Forces, but still 1 million African Americans served in World War II.
The USO's written policy was to provide services to African American troops.
There were certain local conditions where that was going to be difficult, particularly in the South, in the Old South.
There was two separate USO. The white USO Center is downtown Hattiesburg, a 2-story red brick building.
When the white and black soldiers would come in from Camp Shelby on leave, they would have fights. So they formed the USO here, because black soldiers wasn't allowed downtown. It was just like that.
African Americans were not allowed in certain businesses. They had to go through certain doors for the businesses that they were allowed. There were definitely lines that they couldn't cross.
For the GI, most of them not from the South and not accustomed to the South activities. It was a safe place.
So part of that too is I want everybody to think about that if you take a large number of trainees, young men, and you say, let's train in another part of the country, let's do boot camp and let's train for the infantry or going to war in another part of the country. Usually you would think of it as, let's just take these, 500 men and put them in this camp and then say go, right? But it's really not like that. And I think part of the reason why I like this video so much is that it reminds us that these soldiers were human beings. They have stories, they have families. I can imagine a soldier like maybe wanting to be close to his family or talk to his family. So I think that is also just kind of like what we should think about, is like that even though the Army, number one, takes away your identity and it's kind of like all for one, and one for all, it's also too that morale is so important, and how these soldiers feel about their country and about how and what purpose they have in their hearts to do the work for this country. So I'm going to move on and just say, when I first started researching this, I did see a lot of articles in the Medford Tribune about how colored troops were entertained in town, which led me to the creation of this slide that you see here. Well, actually, it led to the creation of a Negro recreation center in Medford, which is now a brick building, a Caldwell Banker building, on the corner of East Bartlett and Main. But it was formerly the Owl Pitch store. And that was, I think it was downstairs. Sorry, it was upstairs from that store that the Black soldiers could hang out, play cards, dance, listen to music, talk to each other, just be together. And really, if I could just back up a little bit and say, Medford wasn't really a place where all the infrastructure for segregation was all set up. Meaning, like, restaurants didn't have their own section for Black people. Because of the population was so low, that infrastructure that, like you might see in the South, the drinking fountains, the bathrooms, the theaters were not set up. And let me just back up again. Camp White is really just was almost felt as, even from the beginning, like a temporary setup too. And so a lot of people had to move very quickly to help entertain these Negro or colored troops. The entire country was recognizing the need to entertain Black soldiers at the time. And Oregon elected its own committee to tackle the problem. In Portland, Albany, and Salem, I did include just a little snippet in my slide that says Negro Recreation Committee Plan. That was Oregon's own doing. National USO chapters were essential, not only in boosting the morale of African American soldiers, but in helping soldiers become accustomed to the strange places that were not home. Okay, so that leads me I just wanted to show you guys this. This is the white USO in Medford. It was, after the building was built, it became the largest USO recreation center on the West Coast. It had 30,000 feet of floor space in a rousing grand opening. There's several pictures of the grand opening that I've found historically, and lots of different stories that came out of this USO. But again, the largest USO recreation center at the time on the West Coast. So anyway, this whole idea of benevolent families and entertaining Negro troops led me to the Carpenters. Helen and Alfred Carpenter donated their home for at least 2 swimming pool parties around 1943. And in the upper left-hand corner, you see their home as it looked in 1943. Beautiful. The picture below that is what it is now. It is now Hummingbird Estate, a winery that actually is really, really close to my house, coincidentally. I could probably look out a window and see the spires of that home right here as I sit. But Helen Carpenter was instrumental. Helen Carpenter created the Jackson County Recreation Committee, which would organize social events, not just for Black troops, but for all troops. And they would provide that kind of support to those soldiers in our valley. And one of the first things this committee did is it hired a woman by the name of Marjorie Hopkins Pena, and she was tasked with basically entertaining Negro troops in Southern Oregon. She was interviewed in 1978 by the Oregon Historical Society in Ashland. And I'm going to read you some of this, some of her transcript, some of her interview. But what was amazing to me is before any troops even landed in Camp White, 1,500 colored men from Texas, I'm sorry, I'm reading the slide, were the very first soldiers to arrive at Camp White. And they were soldiers. They were not butlers. They were not moving men. They were not, they were just called a housekeeping crew, which meant that they would move furniture. They would unload and load. And that's true of a lot of World War II African-American soldiers. So I'm going to read some of this. Just at the end of the building of camp, 1,500 colored men came from Texas. They were soldiers there, and they came as a housekeeping crew, and they were to move in furniture and get the barracks all ready. And of course, Medford and Ashland and the neighboring places were not too joyous to have that many colored people come into our communities and in the bars and different places. She makes a reference to Klamath Falls, where at the railroad terminal there was a several number of colored families. She makes that reference. And then she continues on, and she says, they were very talented men, very well-educated men who were there. And they came in and would help me set up the chairs. She's talking about setting up the recreation center, which is not the one I showed you, but the one prior to that, which is basically in the old Gates Home Furnishing store in East Medford. And they came in and they would help me get the chairs around, make it kind of cozy. And different groups, church groups, neighborhood groups would come down with programs and entertain the men at nights. The difficulty was in, people wanting to show their friendship unwisely, to the extent that they would allow their daughters to walk down the street with colored soldiers. And I said, this is really very dangerous. It's dangerous for the colored man as it would be for your daughter. Now, not that there is anything wrong or there would be any harm for your daughter from the soldiers, but the feeling of the community was pretty narrow. And so, end quote, sorry. So what I would conclude from that is, yes, that there were some preemptive fears that went along with some of this de facto cultural behaviors that everybody knew about from newspapers, and just from what was going on in the country and going on in the South. So I loved her interview. It actually made me realize that there was probably, in my own opinion, about 1,000 African-American soldiers at any one time in Camp White. And I'm just from this interview. Okay. My next slide shows just kind of like in the background there, a picture of a man named Claude Wells. Now, Claude Wells, I came across just by chance as I was going through these newspapers, that Claude Wells was a story. Sorry, I'm going to back up here. This story really derailed my focus. On the evening of August 18th, 1942, the Medford Mail Tribune reported that 2 Negro soldiers were held in city jail for an alleged attack on a 31-year-old white woman, married white woman. The incident is really hard to dramatize here, as the details recorded by the Medford Mail Tribune were not as clear as to what exactly transpired. This woman was with a white soldier from Camp White, and the two were standing under the Bear Creek Bridge. It was not clear that the white soldier was her husband from the newspapers, but what happened was that the soldiers allegedly had taken this woman from the white soldier, and the white soldier ran to find the police, and they took the white woman to a vacant lot, attacked her while one held her. And that's all alleged. But this story actually gave me the first 4 names of the very first Black soldiers at Camp White that I came across historically in all these records. And I came across the name of Claude Wells as being one of those soldiers that was wrapped up in that incident. And so what ends up happening is that the woman never, ever files a charge against these men. I was teaching Jim Crow at the time that I found this article, so my mind wasn't really in the right place for this, because I know that there was a lot of hysteria that came from white women in the South, or these alleged attacks on white women in the South, et cetera, would oftentimes spark some mob violence, lynchings, etc. So really, that kind of sets the stage for something like that here in Southern Oregon. Even the alleged part oftentimes doesn't really sit clearly with the public. But what ends up happening is nothing. And I say that very flippantly. I say that it's not nothing. The white woman refuses to file charges. The district attorney turns the whole case over to the Army, and then nothing. I don't hear anything about if there's a court martial, anything. But I ran down the names of these 4 soldiers, and because 3 of the soldiers had very common names, Claude Wells stuck out, and Claude Wells actually popped up in Ancestry.com as being a World War II veteran of foreign wars. His birth date lined up with the article. There's never really anything that I found that links him to Camp White, except for this attack, alleged attack. But what Claude ends up doing is he ends up, in my best research, going to Italy to help liberate Italy from the Nazis. So I'm going to forward to this slide, which shows how basically those soldiers at Camp White eventually went over to Italy. And if you look at liberating Italy from the Nazis with colored soldiers, you will see that a lot of colored regiments actually were in Italy and did help liberate Rome from the Nazis. Lots of colored regiments in that history. But also the history says that Charles Gephardt's 91st Infantry, who are in Camp White, were in Italy. So when Claude Wells returns home, he gets married, he has a life, he has children, he dies at the age of 63 and just becomes almost kind of like a war hero in his hometown. And he is Black, and this is his draft card, which has him checked off the Negro. He does check himself as a Negro, his complexion and things like that on the draft card. So I have yet to make the final confirmation that Claude Wells was the same Claude Wells in Camp White. But that is some of the research that we were really excited about. So this is my only photograph sorry, I'm going to back up and not say it's my only photograph. This is my first photograph of a colored soldier in Camp White. It was in a magazine called Camp White Rogue. It was a type of celebration where every regiment had to bring like a pet or a mascot on parade. It was really fun entertainment. And this was the photo that was in the magazine. It is really the only photo that the Southern Oregon Historical Society owns of a colored soldier during that time at Camp White. We don't know the name of the soldier, but I just want to salute you, Staff Sergeant. Thank you for being here, and thank you for smiling for our cameras. We really appreciate you and everything that you've done. Okay, and we're going to try to switch to some further slides that I have. These came out of the same magazine, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about these. Mostly, we have segregated units at Camp White, where the colored soldiers have their own barracks, etc. But this is the boxing team. On the left is the basically the first team boxing team. And you can see that several of these boxers are of Hispanic origin. It looks like one of the fellows is also maybe of Chinese or Japanese origin. But really, you can see that there was some integration despite despite what would be, like historically, what we historically understand throughout the country. If we can go to the next slide, I'm going to show you guys. This is some of the most recent photos that we found on eBay. And they are soldiers from Camp White who are doing trainings in the mud. And Camp White was very muddy. But if you start to take a look at this photo, it does have written that the person who took the photos wrote down the names: Johnson, Salazar, Trasnik, Gomez, and Stevenson. And they look like a very, a mixed bunch ethnically. If we can go to the next slide, we do see that we have, I assume as Mr. Johnson, Private Johnson, in this group of 5 soldiers who are doing the training. Don't know his rank. I'm just going to call him Private Johnson. But yeah, we salute you, Private Johnson. If we could go to the next slide. This is just an article that I found in Portland's Oregonian newspaper of a Lieutenant Robert Dees of Portland, who was a member of the 99th Division All-Negro Flying Squadron. And he is heroic because he has helped down 12 Nazi planes. And this is not a transplant from Alabama who came to train in Oregon. This is not somebody from another area of America that came to train in Oregon. He is a Portland native and did some heroic things. And you guys will learn more about him next year with Oregon's Black History Quest. Okay, next slide. So I want to kind of finish by saying when I first went out to Camp White Museum, which is now White City, Oregon, I did see this case, a very large glass case where a coffee-colored mannequin was there to represent John Fox, who was a Buffalo Soldier. It wasn't really clear what they were trying to represent, but there was another case just like this one with a white soldier in it in the same room. So I'm thinking that, yes, they wanted Camp White Museum, and I never did get to speak to anyone from administration from Camp White Museum who could tell me more about this. But that John Fox, who they basically featured in this case, really did not train in Camp White. He's also another African-American hero from the 92nd Division. but I just kind of thought I'd show you this case. Maybe Camp White Museum would love to hire me, and I can kind of change some of their labels and give them some more information. But there really is part 2 to this presentation. Whereas even though I didn't find the most and greatest individual stories from those soldiers in Camp White, I still have a lot more to research. And I definitely am really excited about what I might find in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I know that was a lot, but I thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate everything that Black History Quest is doing in our state. So yeah, thanks everybody.
Well, thank you, Kellen. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for kind of walking us through some of these concepts that we all could use reminders on. So I definitely appreciate that. And, both the highlight for some episodes that we have coming up next year. That's right. Black History Quest always continues. And the idea that you might be able to come back and join us again, or,
I would love to.
potentially, do a guest spot on our blog or something like that to continue this story. We do like to share as the quest continues, because typically getting this research started is just step 1, right? As soon as you're kind of diving in, you want to continue and do more. And so we've seen the research that we've had on this program get turned into, actual signage, talking about this history. So yeah,
That's awesome.
maybe someday this will grow into a highlight of an actual figure that would have been at Camp White being featured in that museum. Maybe that's what this grows into.
There's no
But
question. There's no question. When I talk to the historians and I say, well, why is there such a lack of material or stories? And part of it too is that one of the historians, Jan Wright, who helped me, really believes that there is almost kind of a mother lode of stories that are not here in Oregon, but are kept in other private places throughout the country about being here in Oregon, in Camp White. So I think it's just going to take some time to uncover some of these stories for sure.
sure. Absolutely. But still, it is interesting that you were able to find, I mean, even just the idea that there were 1,000 soldiers that didn't come to train necessarily, but came to set up camp for the next folks. Like, this is pieces of the puzzle that we certainly didn't have before. So
Right.
it's really good that we can keep adding to it and hopefully like getting the full puzzle eventually.
Yes.
But with our limited time, I do want to ask a few questions.
Yeah.
I suppose one of the main questions that I have, you kind of alluded to it, that you have more research to do. So, is there any specific research directions, like anything in particular that you want to do to try to uncover more stories, or what
Yeah.
your plans are?
With the timing of how this Black History Quest presentation went down, I still haven't talked to the Carpenters, or like someone like Virginia Westfield, who also offered her home to these Black soldiers. So, because of this almost kind of like outlying fear and segregation and Jim Crow, a lot of these people lent their homes to Black soldiers. There's a story there.
Right.
There's a story about these Black soldiers being at these homes and interacting with these people from Medford who opened up their homes. So there's definitely, so I haven't, it was bad timing for the Carpenter Foundation. They know that I am doing this work, and they are still yet to get back to me. And so I will let you know. But I know that
Sure.
they have stories.
Okay, well, I mean, that's cool. I'm glad you already have a thread that you're planning to pull. We also got a question from the chat. We were curious, have you found any connection between the Black USOs in Medford and those in Portland or elsewhere around Oregon? Was there any sort of network connecting these folks, or did you
Yes.
uncover anything like that? You did.
Yes. I didn't uncover things like
Sure.
that because the USO records are also very hard to find.
Mm.
They they're either in Seattle or Washington, D.C. And so part of that too is there's archivists that are looking up those records too. But the USO keeps records. They were in touch with the USO in San Francisco. They were in touch with the USO. It was quite, I mean, I'm just so impressed with the USO as not being, like government funded or state funded, that this organization really did so much. And it's almost the story, really. I mean, USOs were connected. They did know, so just to give you an example, if they knew Camp White was opening, let's say July 1942, there's other USOs that would start organizing and start saying, like, what can we do in Medford? What can we do? We know that this large cantonment is going to bring a large amount of Negro troops to this area. We need to do something. We need to put something in place. And so there is a story there too that's really interesting. But yeah.
Yeah. No, that definitely is interesting. There's certainly more that we will hopefully be able to uncover about these
Yeah.
stories. You make a great point about the power of, nonprofits that are not governmentally like funded, speaking of Oregon Black Pioneers, but no, it is great that they were able to provide those opportunities for folks, even if they were, doing them in segregated facilities. At least there were those places where people could be people, like that PBS documentary mentioned. As we are getting close to our end time, I want to make sure that I ask the question that I ask everyone. So I have to know, how has what you've uncovered changed our understanding of history, in your opinion?
Well, I'm going to just paraphrase that, and I'm going to just say it changed the way my future students are going to understand World War II. Especially in my African American studies class. But even if I was teaching U.S. history, it'd be the same thing. That what changed for me is how important our home, like just within the United States borders, was the things that the things that any ordinary person might do in a community to help the war effort was huge. Like, it's almost the whole story. Like, in a lot of ways, yeah, the glory goes to soldiers who die in battle and go overseas and come back and, defeat Hitler and the Nazis. Yes. But really, if we can just, in a lot of ways, control the fear and hysteria that a lot of times we take on as a people and a community for foreign, I guess, actors, foreign dictators, or foreign regimes, right? That kind of instill that fear at home. If we can control that, there's nothing that we can't do. That is really just kind of like what I've been impressed with, is our communities, and how our communities are such important pieces of this puzzle.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is thanks to the folks that were willing to open up their homes, that we, have stories to share today. And
Yeah.
that is true all over Oregon's Black history, and
Yeah.
oftentimes Black communities opening up their homes to folks that are visiting. But it definitely, the impact of the white folks that were doing this is huge as well. So
Right.
that's very interesting. And I thank you so much for your thoughts, and especially to know that you're going to be kind of incorporating this into what the future leaders in Oregon are going to be
Yeah.
learning. So
Absolutely.
that is always good. So with that, I guess we'll kind of go ahead and wrap it up. But it has been so wonderful to learn from you this evening, Kellen.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being our history investigator this time, and for sharing
Yeah.
your research with us.
What a wonderful experience, Mariah. I am just so glad you asked me to do this. Just so much fun. I love Black History Quest, and I've watched probably every episode. So
Yay, love that. So you are a true Oregon Black Pioneer, it sounds
yes,
like.
I am.
That's fantastic. Well, we are so glad to have you on board and to have
Thank
you as a
you.
supporter in general. Yeah, so thank you so much for spending your evening with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. And thank you,
Yeah.
Mariah and Belinda and Zachary Stocks.
Yay. I appreciate the call outs to my incredible team because I would not be able to do it without them, especially Belinda. So thank you so much, Belinda, for making sure that things run smoothly in the background. Now, that will actually do it for this episode of Black History Quest. So, as always, we want to make sure to thank the Collins Foundation for sponsoring the show. Make sure to learn more about them and the projects that they support outside of this at collinsfoundation.org. And we also want to thank our fellow Oregon Black pioneers for tuning in. OBP depends on the support of people like you who believe in uplifting the stories of Oregon's Black history. So if you enjoyed this show and would like to support it and others like it, please consider a donation to Oregon Black Pioneers using the link below. Now, if you have questions about this episode or would like to become a history investigator yourself, please send an email to hello@oregonblackpioneers.org. If you want to sign up for our newsletter to stay in the loop about upcoming programs, visit our website, scroll to the bottom, and enter your email. Now, stay tuned for the next episode of Black History Quest in May, where, as always, we'll try to answer the question, how can one source change history? Thank you so much for joining us, and good night.